Abraham Lincoln, Honest Abe, the 16th President of the United States, the first Republican president, lawyer, father, vampire hunter, and zombie slayer. This guy did it all. He's got some timeless quotes, such as, "Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power," and, "Whatever you are, be a good one." He's also got some pretty creepy quotes that would make you think he could see into the future. No, seriously, listen to this. "America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves." Or, my personal favorite, "There are no bad pictures. That's just how your face looks sometimes." Now, there's a harsh truth about social media 150 plus years before it existed. He's mostly known for leading our country through the Civil War, his Gettysburg Address speech, the Emancipation Proclamation, and his eventual assassination. While these are all great topics to dive into, I'm here today to analyze his life and personality to try and determine what kind of video games Abraham Lincoln would play. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, to Thomas and Nancy Lincoln and had two older siblings, Sarah and Thomas Jr. Young Abraham was raised on a family farm in Indiana for most of his childhood and early adult life, since his father had to leave their original farm in Kentucky due to a land title dispute. 2 years after moving to Indiana, 9-year-old Abe lost his mother to milk sickness, which was not uncommon among those in the Midwest during this time. Thomas Lincoln would go back to Kentucky and remarry the following year to Sarah Johnston, who was a widow with 3 children. They would all move back to the Indiana farm after the marriage. Abe grew fond of his new stepmother, who encouraged his excitement for learning and shared her own books with him. Several years later, his older sister, Sarah, would die during childbirth. Those who knew Abe during this time said that he was deeply distraught by his sister's death. Shortly after Sarah died, 19-year-old Abe and a dude by the name of Allen Gentry would make a trip along the Ohio River to New Orleans, Louisiana. How much of the city he experienced is unknown, but it's very likely that he could have witnessed his first slave trade during this trip, which may have influenced his views on slavery. Fast forward to 1830. 21-year-old Abraham Lincoln and 13 members of his extended family moved to Illinois. Abe helped his father build a log cabin, fences, and cleared 10 acres of land to grow corn. In the following spring, he decided to move out on his own to New Salem after making another New Orleans trip with John Johnston and John Hanks. It was in New Salem that he decided to join a debate club on top of managing a store, sawmill, gristmill, and protect the good townsfolk from vampires and zombies. Recognizing the fact that Lincoln wore many hats and wore them quite well, the town's leader encouraged him to enter the world of politics. He'd go on to voice his concerns on the local level, such as opposing the development of a local railroad or supporting improvements to the Sangamon River to make it easier to traverse. In spring of 1832, he was out of a job and joined a volunteer group in the Black Hawk War to prevent the Sauk chief, Black Hawk, from reclaiming the land that he unknowingly signed away in a peace treaty from 1816. While Lincoln was elected captain of his unit, they never saw any combat in this conflict. Black Hawk would eventually surrender to future president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, in case anyone was interested in how that ended. Lincoln would return from the war a few months later to start campaigning in Sangamon County before the election. At the end of the day, only the top 4 candidates are elected, and Abe was 8th place out of 13. For what it's worth, he did get 277 out of the 300 votes in Salem. Shortly after taking an L during the race, and still without a job, he decided to open a store in New Salem with an old war buddy, William Berry. And yes, I'm referring to the Black Hawk War that lasted an entire 4.5 months. Anyways, Abe and Will signed personal notes to open the Lincoln Berry store, which flopped. Unemployed again, Lincoln realized that he'd have to leave New Salem. Luckily for him, he had a few homies that wanted to keep him around. He got a job as the postmaster of New Salem and became an assistant to the county surveyor. What does the county surveyor do? I don't know, and neither did Lincoln. but he read a couple books and he was able to teach himself how to get the job done. By the time 1834 rolled around, his debts from the Lincolnberry days were catching up to him, and he decided to give it another go at running for a state legislature. At this point, he was a member of the Whig Party, with his campaign focused on traveling and meeting the voters within the district. I mean, it makes sense, right? The dude got 277 votes out of the 300 in his hometown on the first run, so it would appear that his only problem was that the other towns just didn't know who he was. His main opponent was John Todd Stewart, an attorney from Springfield and the district's leading Whig candidate at the time, and also someone Lincoln knew from his militia days in, you guessed it, the Black Hawk War. I find it fascinating how many people he met during this 4-month period, considering the fact that him and his crew didn't actually do anything in the war, as far as I know. Also, how many dudes were named John back then? You got John Johnson and John Hanks from the second New Orleans strip, and now we got John Stewart from the legislative race. I'm not that great at math, but the population was a lot smaller back then, considering there was only 300 voters in New Salem, and all the Johns listed so far are just the important ones in Lincoln's life story, so you know there's a lot of other Johns out there that just aren't important to this narrative. Like, is this some default 1800s name? Or did the name John, increase your chances of surviving until adulthood? Wait, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, Lincoln's Legislative Run Part 2 Electric Boogaloo. Anyways, the local Democrats in the district really disliked this John Stewart dude because they offered to withdraw 2 of their own candidates to support Lincoln. John Stewart was so confident in his ability to beat Lincoln that he told him to go ahead and accept the Democrats' endorsement. When the dust settled on August 4th, Lincoln got 1,376 votes, which was the second highest number in the race, and got one of the 4 seats along with Stewart. John was impressed with Lincoln and encouraged him to study law. Abe was no stranger to courtrooms thanks to the fact that his father would go there fairly often to file land deeds, serve on juries, attend sheriff's sales, and have his own legal issues. Abe would also watch court cases in his free time in Indiana and New Salem. He'd noticed how often lawyers would refer to the statutes of Indiana, the Declaration of Independence, and the U.S. Constitution, and he would go on to study the documents. After reading several law books, Lincoln would start taking the first steps to becoming an attorney in March of 1836. He'd go on to get his law license on September 9th, 1836, after passing his oral examination taken in front of a panel of practicing attorneys. He then moved to Springfield to partner with John Stewart and practice law before the Supreme Court of Illinois. Apparently, there were a lot less hoops to jump through back then. For the next several years, Lincoln would draft bills, become the floor leader of the Whig Party and Log 9, and continue to get reelected. Some of his notable stances were keeping voting limited to property owners, wanting well-developed roads, canals, and railroads, and moving the Illinois state capital to Springfield. At one point, Lincoln was challenged to a duel by James Shields because Lincoln's girlfriend, Mary Todd, and her homegirl kept writing letters bashing Shields without Lincoln even knowing about it. Keep in mind that dueling was illegal in Illinois, but Lincoln accepted and chose broadswords as weapons since James was known to be a pretty good shot. Before the duel started, Lincoln flexed his long reach by cutting the branch above Shields' head, and their seconds stepped in to stop the duel since Lincoln didn't actually write the letters himself. In 1838, he gave his Lyceum address where he spoke about the dangers of slavery in the U.S., how it was creating a lawless country, and referenced a few murders committed by pro-slavery mobs. I might as well get this out of the way now since Lincoln's stance on slavery is what he's most known for. While yes, he was against slavery for both moral and political reasons, he definitely didn't view black people as equals. I'll leave this quote on screen, but the main gist of it is that there should be a superior race, and in his unbiased opinion as a white man, white people are better. So take that for what you will. That's something I never learned in history class. Fast forward to 1841. Lincoln had been doing the lawyer gig with Stewart for a few years now, and even got to the point where he ran the practice on his own after Stewart was elected to Congress. Eventually, Lincoln wasn't happy carrying the entire firm on his back and decided to start a new partnership in 1841 with Stephen T. Logan, who was the leading attorney in Sangamon County. Lincoln's lawyer skills would get a decent boost by spending a lot of time in the Supreme Court library reading precedents that apply to his current cases and getting more in tune with the procedures of the courtroom. In 1844, this partnership would dissolve when Logan entered a new partnership with his son. Lincoln would also move on to a new partnership, but with William Herndon, who was also an active member of the Whig Party. During this time, Lincoln would start making more court appearances in neighboring communities, becoming highly demanded from the clients and local attorneys, eventually earning his nickname Honest Abe. Now rewind a little bit. Remember this chick, Mary Todd? The one who wrote all that smack talk about James Shields and almost got Abe involved in a duel that he had nothing to do with? Yeah, her. Well, her and Lincoln were engaged in 1840 with a wedding date set for January 1st, 1841. They called it off and took a break. In this time, Lincoln courted Sarah Rickard and proposed to her, but got shot down. During a visit to one of his homeboys and former roommate, Joshua Speed, Lincoln met Speed's fiancée, who he was having doubts about marrying. Lincoln convinced him to do it, and Speed also told Lincoln that he should get married soon too. So, Abe and Mary got back together, they got married, and they go on to have 4 sons, Robert, Edward, William, and Thomas. I just like to take this moment to appreciate the fact that none of them are named John, despite running into so many of them during his life. From here on out, Lincoln dives deeper into his political career. Some highlights include campaigning for Henry Clay's presidential run in 1844, which was one of his personal heroes, running for Congress in 1846, serving a term in the House of Representatives from 1847 to 1849, campaigning for Zachary Taylor in his presidential run, and the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates. For those that don't know, Lincoln was running as the Republican Party candidate for the U.S. Senate against the current senator from the Democratic Party, Stephen Douglas. They held 3-hour debates in each of the Illinois districts, which gained major news coverage both locally and nationally. There was quite a bit of name-calling and shade being thrown back and forth, with Douglas calling Lincoln an abolitionist for thinking that the Declaration of Independence applied to black people, and Lincoln claiming that Douglas was part of a conspiracy to nationalize slavery. It's quite interesting to dive into, but for the sake of time, I'll skip to the part where the Republicans won the popular vote, but the Democrats won more seats, so the legislature went on to re-elect Douglas to the Senate. As much as it sucked for Lincoln to lose here, he did build up a political reputation on the national level. Eventually, Lincoln would be nominated as a Republican candidate for 1860's presidential election. Lincoln and the Republican Party were focused on restricting the expansion of slavery into new areas, since they believed that the Constitution prevented the federal government from abolishing slavery from states where it already existed. He planned to prevent the growth of slavery by offering monetary compensation to owners in states that agreed to end slavery. Lincoln's campaign would cultivate a nationwide youth organization to get younger folks to register to vote, knowing that they'd be more likely to embrace new and young parties. Interestingly enough, Lincoln was the only candidate that did not give any speeches. The Republican Party did the heavy lifting for him, with thousands of speakers focusing on the party platform and Lincoln's own life story. The story of how a farm boy could grow up in poverty and get to the top through his own hard work and efforts. I'm not sure if this is the original pick yourself up by the bootstrap story, but it was extremely popular. The Chicago Tribune's pamphlet about Lincoln's life sold over 100,000 copies. He'd go on to win the election entirely off of the support in the northern and western states. To put it into perspective, he only won 2 out of the 996 counties in the southern states. From here, we know how the story goes. Southern states begin to pull out of the Union, the Civil War starts, Emancipation Proclamation, the South loses, out with slavery, in with indentured servitude, which is somehow worse than slavery, blah blah blah, you get the point. I'm not here to beat a dead horse since this is a topic heavily covered in a lot of US history classes, but there are some things I want to point out before we move on. Lincoln supported the Corwin Amendment, which would have protected slavery in states where it currently existed. The amendment had already passed Congress and just needed to be ratified by the states when Lincoln took office. When the South started to secede from the Union, they lost any ability to ratify this amendment. Lincoln also warned the South that if slave states seceded from the Union, they would forfeit their constitutional protection of slavery, which included the right to recover fugitive slaves. The next thing I'd like to point out is the Emancipation Proclamation. It stated that any slaves in Confederate states were free, but the South had already seceded from the Union, so in order for this to do anything at the time, slaves would have to escape the Confederacy and make their way to the Union. While it eventually paved the way for the 13th Amendment, it was really just a giant middle finger to the Confederacy. Anyways, moving on, Lincoln won his re-election in 1864, which in hindsight should be very obvious. The Confederate States were not part of the election since the war didn't end until 1865. This also happens to be the year in which Lincoln was assassinated by the stage actor John Wilkes Booth while attending the Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. to watch Our American Cousin. I think the fascinating part about this is how Lincoln was shot in the head but didn't die until the next day. There's a fun little history fact for you. So here we reach the end of Abraham Lincoln's life story, leaving out an insane amount of detail, because otherwise we'd be here all day. But before we get into what kind of video games he'd play, we need to dive into his personality. He's often described as honest, eager to learn, hardworking, kind, and respectful. He's also described as an affectionate father and fond of children, although he wasn't a particularly strict father. Sometimes Lincoln would bring his children into the office, and his law partner, William Herndon, stated that, and I quote, "I have felt many and many a time that I wanted to wring their little necks, and yet out of respect for Lincoln, I kept my mouth shut." Lincoln did not note what his children were doing or had done. So, yeah, Lincoln was that dad. Something I didn't mention earlier was that two of Lincoln's sons died before he did. Edward died on February 1st, 1850, from what was probably tuberculosis, and William got a fever and died in the White House on February 20th, 1862. As you would imagine, this caused Lincoln to enter a state of depression. I feel like adding a few more Abe Lincoln quotes will help us get a better idea of how he thinks. "I laugh because I must not cry. That is all. That is all. When I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. That's my religion. I'm a success today because I had a friend who believed in me and I didn't have the heart to let him down. Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. I do not think much of a man who is not wiser today than he was yesterday. You can tell the greatness of a man by what makes him angry. The better part of one's life consists of friendships. When I get ready to talk to people, I spend 2/3 of the time thinking what they want to hear and 1/3 thinking about what I want to say. If there is anything that links the human to the divine, it is the courage to stand by a principle when everybody else rejects it. Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves, and, under a just God, cannot retain it. My father taught me to work, but I do not love it. I never did like to work, and I don't deny it. I'd rather read, tell stories, crack jokes, talk, laugh, anything but work. Die when I may, I want it said of me by those who knew me best that I always plucked a thistle and planted a flower where I thought a flower would grow. And finally, writing, the art of communicating thoughts to the mind through the eye, is the great invention of the world, enabling us to converse with the dead, the absent, and the unborn at all distances of space and time. It's almost like he knew I would be doing this someday. And now I think we're ready to answer the question, what kind of gamer would Abraham Lincoln be? As someone who enjoyed reading, storytelling, friendship, and standing by their beliefs in the face of adversity, I'm going to say that the RPG role-playing game genre would resonate with Lincoln the most, specifically Japanese role-playing games. That's right, you heard it here first, Abe Lincoln would be a weeb. But in all seriousness, I do think that he would like the genre for their stories and strategic combat. I'll start this off with the Fire Emblem series, which is known for its strategy-based combat. I'll even put my foot in my mouth here and say that Ike from Path of Radiance and Lincoln share some similar experiences. They both started off poor, not really well educated, and would go on to lead a nation in a war, and they both fought against racism. Well, Lincoln fought against slavery and not so much racism itself, but I do think that Path of Radiance would be a game he'd enjoy and maybe change his outlook on race. I'll also name drop Three Houses here since Claude's story deals with similar issues, but the game also has three other story routes and perspectives to offer. While I do think he'd enjoy the series as a whole, I'd put these two at the top of the list. Also, as a side note, Abraham Lincoln himself does kind of come off as a Fire Emblem character. He's tall, honest, stands up for his beliefs, and he's skilled with an axe. Yeah, the series is definitely up his alley. Next up, I'd like to mention the Tales series, specifically Tales of Symphonia and Tales of Vesperia. Symphonia takes place in a dying world where mana, the source of energy, is becoming scarcer with each passing day. In order to combat this, you embark on the journey of world regeneration, traveling to different continents to awaken the summoned spirits, release the seals, and help the Chosen One turn into an angel that will regenerate the world. The story is filled with twists and turns, and it has a heavy focus on corruption within religion and the dangers of blind faith. Tales of Vesperia also has humble beginnings with the main character chasing down a thief who stole a very vital item in the poorest district in the capital, and as the story unfolds, you end up fighting the corruption within the Empire. These games start off simple enough, but then turn into something much greater with enough plot twists to make you think twice about anything at face value. This, on top of the fact that the Tales series has a great combat system and is just fun to play, are reasons why I think Lincoln would enjoy these games. The series also gets bonus points for being multiplayer, so he can enjoy these games with his children as well. I'll end the RPG section of this with the Xenoblade Chronicles, a game known for its unique combat system and a mind-blowing story. This game starts off with the conflict between the Bionis and Mechonis, basically man versus machine. They fought to a stalemate a long time ago, and in their deaths, life started appearing on the surface of these titans. Fast forward to the present, and the people of the Bionis are at war with the machines from the Mechonis, known as Mechon. Normal weapons have little to no effect on the Mechon, and the Homs, which are like the humans from the Bionis, rely on the Bionis' sword, the Monado, to repel the Mechon. As this story unfolds, you learn about the history of the two worlds and the reason why the Mechon hate the Homs and work towards putting an end to the war once and for all. I can't really talk too much about the story since it's filled to the brim with plot twists, but it is by far one of the best stories told in the video game. Add on the fact that the game's world is insanely massive, filled with side quests, and has a great combat system that blends real-time fighting with strategic elements of turn-based combat, and you've got one of the best games the entire genre has to offer. If Lincoln was really a man that enjoyed storytelling, this would blow him away. Besides role-playing games, what else do I think Abraham Lincoln would play? Well, seeing as how Lincoln was a family man, I'd have to go with local multiplayer games, the kind where you can sit on the couch and play together with friends and family. Is it a cop-out answer? Absolutely, but I can't deny the fact that if his kids wanted him to play games like Mario Kart, Mario Party, or Overcooked, he would. He loves spending time with his kids, and if that's what they wanted to do, then he'd join in, even if he wasn't particularly fond of the games themselves. On that same note, if his close friends were into some online multiplayer games, I think Lincoln would hop on from time to time and play with the squad. And if they all have good taste, they'll pick something like Monster Hunter. Now look, I'm not saying that Abraham Lincoln would only play these games that I mentioned. I definitely think there's plenty of other games he'd enjoy. Maybe something like Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask would help him with depression, but these were the first games that came to mind when putting this video together. If you feel that I overlooked a great game that Lincoln would like, leave a comment below and tell me what he'd play. If you feel that I completely read Lincoln's character and personality wrong, tell me in the comment section where I messed up. If you'd like to see more videos like this, hit the like button, leave a comment, tell me who should be the next historical figure in this series. And finally, if I got any of the historical parts wrong and that infuriates you, I need you to remember that I'm just some guy on the internet.